Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to electric cooking to building codes and beyond. On this episode, we'll chat with Aidan Callan, Program Manager for the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance Program at the City of Boston, and Katarina Michalova, Program Manager in the Office of Building Performance at the City of St. Louis. What are building performance standards, and how are they going to help these cities reduce their emissions from existing buildings? Stay tuned to find out. Here's your host, Atlas Public Policy Analyst Stephen Naimoli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of Buildings Hub Live. My name is Stephen Naimoli, Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy. I have the honor of being your host today. For today's episode, we'll discuss building performance standards. What are they, and how do they work to reduce emissions from buildings? Stay with us to find out. Before we jump into our discussion today, a quick note on Buildings Hub. Here at Atlas, we manage a one-stop shop data analysis tool for building sector electrification called Buildings Hub. If you're interested in heat pump market data, state buildings policies and funding programs, the current makeup of the U.S. housing stock, federal grants, and crisply designed dashboards, we've got you covered. We recently published a feature on a home here in DC that was electrified with the help of a local nonprofit. We encourage you to register for our platform and check out our data features. We'd love to have you join the Buildings Hub community. As for this episode, we're currently live on YouTube and LinkedIn. We encourage our audience to send us your questions via the Q&A portal on our YouTube live stream, and we'll work them into the discussion. We look forward to hearing from you throughout the episode. It's now my pleasure to introduce our special guests today. We're joined by Aidan Callan, Program Manager for the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance Program at the City of Boston, and Katarina Michalova, Program Manager in the Office of Building Performance at the City of St. Louis. Aidan and Katarina, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for having us.
We've got lots to cover and only half an hour, so we'll get right to it. To start off, Aidan, please tell us a little bit about your role and the role of your department in the City of Boston.
Sure. So I am the BERDO Program Manager. BERDO stands for Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance here in the City of Boston Environment Department. My role is to work with the 5,000 plus buildings that are required to report their data, their energy and water data to the city each year. Starting over the next few years, BERDO puts on an emissions limit to these buildings. So working with those building owners to help them with reporting, but also planning for those emissions limits. And the role of our city environment department is really just to focus on achieving carbon neutrality within the city of Boston, but at the same time, working to prepare ourselves for the impacts of climate change. So coastal resilience and heat resilience.
That's a lot of important work. Thank you. Katarina, same question. Tell us a little bit about your role and the role of your department in St. Louis.
Aidan, 5,000 buildings, that's very impressive. My name is Katarina Michalova, and I'm a program manager for City of St. Louis for Office of Building Performance. We manage around 1,000 buildings in the city, which are subject to benchmarking and building energy performance standards requirements. We do have around 1,000 buildings in the city. We are a small office of 3 people. It is myself and 2 other analysts. And our main role is compliance and enforcement.
That is also incredibly important and key, and something that we're going to be talking about a little bit here today. So thank you to you both for explaining all of that. Aidan, I want to come back to you just to kind of give us a little bit of a level set for our audience. You mentioned a little bit of it already, but fundamentally, how do building performance standards seek to address emissions from existing buildings?
Right. So building performance standards are relatively new policy within the United States. And what they do is they set an emissions limit. So the buildings that are subject to these ordinances starting in a certain year, maybe it's 2025, maybe it's 2030. A large office building downtown, for example, cannot produce more than X amount of CO2 per square foot. So we are imposing an emissions limit on the largest buildings within Boston. And that really what it does is it incentivizes the building owners of those buildings to look longer term to see how their building is performing relative to those upcoming emissions limits, and start planning more proactively, where perhaps they were planning more reactively in this space before, towards energy efficiency and electrification improvements.
And just to follow up, how does Boston specifically set the kind of the threshold for what buildings are kind of included in the standard and what are not?
So right now, the largest of buildings that are covered under BERDO, 35,000 square feet or more for non-residential, 35 or more units for residential, will need to hit that emissions limit starting this year, 2025. Based on 2025 energy data, they'll have to comply with that 2025 year starting next year in 2026. The smaller buildings under BERDO have a bit more runway. They're looking out to 2030 before having to meet those emissions limits. And really, these buildings of this size account for about 40% of the city's total emissions. So that's what we consider the largest buildings within Boston. 30%, another 30% of Boston's emissions come from the other 80,000 small buildings. So what BERDO seeks to do is really incentivize the building owners of those largest buildings, the largest emitters, to start planning more proactively and planning long term.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for talking through that a little bit. Katarina, I want to ask you, does St. Louis approach it in kind of a similar way? Are there key differences, particularly in kind of the buildings that are included or are not included in the standard?
So we do approach to decarbonization similar way, but there are some differences. Our benchmarking requirements came in place in 2018, which requires all large buildings over 50,000 square feet to submit annual energy usage report to us. So building has been submitting this report for years now. We do have some exemptions, which applies to benchmarking and also building energy efficiency standards as well. So we do exempt buildings on the basis of manufacturing. So if the building has any manufacturing or industrial processes, they don't have to submit their energy report to us, and they're not subject to lowering their energy usage. Also, data centers are part of that. But it means that all institutional, municipal, residential and commercial buildings have to submit their energy usage report to us on annual basis, and they have to be energy efficient. Our building energy performance standard policy came in place in year 2020, so basically recently. And the way our program works, we have 4-year cycles. So majority of these buildings have to become energy efficient by end of the cycle. Our first cycle ended last year, 2024. So all our energy reports from building owners will be due May 1st. So this is where we're going to see if the buildings became energy efficient. The way our limits work, we call them standards. Our metrics is weather normalized site EUI. We divided building types into 23 categories. So for example, warehouse and hospitals have different energy needs. So all that reflects in the target, which means that a warehouse energy usage should be way less comparing to the hospitals. So all that reflects in that. We also thought of the affordable housing and churches. So houses of worship and affordable housing, they get more time to comply with these standards. They are on 6-year cycle. So this is what we have. And also difference between Boston and multifamilies. All multifamilies over 50,000 square feet are subject to our BPS policy.
That's really interesting. Thank you to you both for explaining that. It sounds like for both of you, 2025 is going to be a big year. So exciting that we're kind of getting there for both of those cities, and then kind of by extension, since you are some of the among some of the earliest cities that are taking these on, will be an interesting kind of test case for building performance standards more broadly. Kind of along those lines, Aidan, I want to take it back to you and ask you, how does the building performance standard fit in with other decarbonization goals in Boston when it comes to emissions or climate or net zero goals, kind of more broadly?
Sure. So, the city of Boston, pledged to, follow the Paris Climate Agreement back in, I believe it was 2017. And so the city of Boston has a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. So, I mentioned before, about 40% of the city's total emissions are these BERDO buildings. 30% are the smaller buildings. About 20% is transportation, and the remaining 10% industrial manufacturing. So building performance standards are really, aimed to, try to drive down the emissions in the largest emitters within the city in order to meet our long-term goals. We start these emissions limits in 2025, but every 5 years those limits decrease. And there's a pretty steep drop down to 2030 because we do have an interim goal. It's not just net zero by 2050. It's actually 50% emissions reduction by 2030. And that's over a 2005 baseline. So, BERDO is really driving down the largest source of emissions there. And then every 5 years after that emissions limit continues to drop. And one thing I'll also note, what we're really trying to incentivize is for building owners to not just be energy efficient, but to electrify their buildings when reasonable. And a building that is all efficient, all electric is well positioned to, as I say, ride that electric grid decarbonization wave all the way to net zero by 2050. Here in Massachusetts, the electric grid is required by law to increase its renewable capacity by a certain percentage each year. So buildings that are all efficient, all electric are positioned to benefit from that increased renewable capacity on the grid.
So it sounds like there is the BPS is kind of part of a toolkit that fits into a broader goal with the city of Boston.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it poses the question, how are we, trying to drive that additional 30%, all the smaller buildings within Boston, the 80,000 additional, buildings. And that's very much an ongoing conversation, as it has to be. This is, we're entering a lot of uncharted territory here. So we have to continue to discuss the best ways to, incentivize this transition for all building types and all different circumstances. Those small buildings that make up that other 30%, it may just be the case that they are not served well by a broad ordinance like BERDO. They may be better served by policies that are better tailored towards their circumstance.
Well, what's 80,000 buildings here and there, right? Katarina, I have a similar question to you. How does the BPS fit in with other goals or other efforts in the city of St. Louis?
City of St. Louis did greenhouse gases inventory, and it was revealed that 80% of greenhouse gases emissions in the city are done by the buildings. Probably due that our building stock, majority of our buildings are over 100 years old, between 120 to 140 years old. We are one of the oldest city in USA. We have beautiful brick buildings. Many of the buildings are on National Historical Registry, or they are part of the historic district. Depends on the part of the city they are. Benchmarking and building performance standard ordinances are part of our sustainability plan, which we are updating right now. Our goal is similar to Boston, where we are going to decarbonize by year 2050 from our 2005 levels. So this is the plan, and the thought was to capture the largest polluters. So the buildings over 50,000 square feet, which we have 1,000 in the city.
Well, it sounds like you both got a big challenge ahead of you, but but clearly we've got like great minds working on it. So we're excited about that. So you both have mentioned that, you know, your cities, your respective policies in your cities are coming up on a big kind of deadline this year. In the process of going through your designing and implementing these programs, now what challenges have you encountered? Aidan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so, you know, there's really just a challenge, an overarching challenge that comes with the reality of building performance standards being brand new. You know, this is a policy that, you know, is in many cases very untested. When it comes to creating the ordinance, passing regulations, and implementation, a lot of the problems that we encounter, a lot of the questions that we're encountering might not have simple answers or might not have well-established answers because we're one of the first cities to actually reach this point. And we're not going off of some handbook of how to perfectly develop and implement a building performance standard policy. So the challenges are that, you know, each decision that we're making, you know, we're having to think through extremely carefully because we are setting precedent, and there are a lot of other cities throughout the country that are looking to Boston and those other cities that are out front to see how it's going, and to solve their own problems that they're up against. But to be a little bit more specific, implementation challenges, I'd say data quality is a big one that we are, you know, when it comes to building owners that are reporting their data to the city each year, they are required to reach out to the utility companies, gather whole building data, and report that through a platform called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. There are a few different areas where, you know, it could be subject to errors, whether it be inputting the wrong square footage or, you know, inputting the wrong data or thinking that the data does cover your whole building when in fact it doesn't. So we've added a third-party verification requirement to the data reporting piece to better ensure that people can plan with greater confidence moving forward, and they have full understanding of exactly where their building stands. I'd also say outreach is another challenge. You know, certain jurisdictions are dependent upon certain data sets to build their covered buildings list, but also to reach out to those building owners to inform them that they are subject to these ordinances. And it could be the case that, you know, the assessing records, the property tax assessor records that, you know, certain jurisdictions are dependent on to, you know, reach out to these building owners, in some cases might not have the most up-to-date contact information for the folks that we need to be reaching out to. So there is that additional lift that on the administrative side we have to do to make sure that we're reaching these folks effectively and that they're fully aware of what their building is subject to. I'll leave it there now. There are perhaps a few more I could mention. But.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there are plenty of things that you've run into, but appreciate that list. Katarina, what about you? What kinds of implementation challenges have you encountered?
Yep. I would like to echo Aidan, but I'm going to mention at the beginning when benchmarking in our BPS ordinance was put in place, there was a public outreach done, and what the takeaway from that outreach was that community-based organizations or real estate organization, they just wanted to have a seat at the table. They wanted to be included in all this conversation. Also, we were the first city in the Midwest and one of the first 4 in the whole USA, which started benchmarking in BPS. So as Aidan mentioned, 10 years ago, we did the best we could, but now there is a lesson learned from all of us. So other cities, municipalities, and state, they can do a better job. There are also better resources out there. Cities know more how the outreach can be done better with the public community-based organizations, how to serve better affordable housing and all schools and all the buildings which might be in underserved areas. When it comes to actual implementation, everything what Aidan said, data quality. The first major issue is multifamily or any multi-tenant building, because this is where we see many times that building owner or property manager underreported the data, mistakenly reported usage for their office in common areas and forgetting to reporting tenants' places as well. There is a certain procedure for that. Also, sometimes utilities and their customer service might not provide most accurate data. Depends how they're trained their staff. So there's a little bit of disconnect, but I do know that EPA with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, they publish procedure for utilities to train their staff so they'll be able to provide all that, which is called aggregate data, to building owners and property managers, which would include whole buildings usage. So data quality, also, it's new. I'm still surprised how many building owners did not know about that. I would say for us being in St. Louis, we do have a good experience with building owners who are out of state, and if they are in California or New York, they're pretty aware of benchmarking and BPS policy, and they follow through. Sometimes our local building owners are surprised and they're quite upset, but we are there to help them. So we'll lead them through benchmarking process and through BPS policy, explaining rules and what their options are for them. As we are only on the side of compliance and enforcement part, we teamed up with a nonprofit organization called Building Energy Exchange, who was established as a resource for these building owners. So this company, which is only one person right now, connects building owners with all the resources, consultants, grants, and loan opportunities. They also provide training for everyone. So there is help for building owners. They don't have to worry. My suggestion for these large building owners is reach out to us. Don't be afraid, book a consultation, talk to us. Let us know what you're thinking. We let you know how your building is performing and how you need to comply, where you need to be. Depends on your building type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially thinking about what you had said before about different groups kind of having a role in the process, it sounds like there is an opportunity for the private sector, for NGOs, for building owners, all to kind of work together with the city, which is great. It's always great to see that kind of collaboration. So both of you have touched a little bit on the leading by example and providing these learnings for other cities and other jurisdictions to also bring in benchmarking and building performance standards and things like that. Can you provide any examples of other cities or other jurisdictions who have kind of reached out to you and said, we're interested in collaborating or following your lead or learning from you or things like that? Let's start with Katarina this time.
So there's one thing interesting about St. Louis. We are St. Louis City and St. Louis County, which makes a greater St. Louis area. So our ordinances for benchmarking and BPS applies only for city buildings. But we partner up with St. Louis County, and there are a huge meeting where benchmarking and BPS policy will be put in place within a few years, probably very soon. They're gonna start with municipal buildings and go over buildings 50,000 square feet. And that will be City of Clayton in particular, which is part of the St. Louis County. So basically when we talk to anyone, this is just a matter of time and all these rules and ordinances will be in place all over. And this will be a new normal. just part of the life. As when you purchase an appliance, it does have an Energy Star rating on it. Will be same with the buildings. When you're gonna rent a place or buy a house or occupy office in any buildings, will have some kind of ratings, or you will be able to check energy performance. So this will be just part of the everyday life within a few years.
That's great. As a renter and someone who will probably eventually buy a home, that is always would be a lovely thing to see. Aidan, what about you? Are there any kind of examples that come to mind about other cities or jurisdictions that have reached out?
Yeah, that's very much an ongoing conversation with many jurisdictions across the country. As I mentioned before, building performance standards are new, and every city that is or jurisdiction, it could be statewide as well, that is looking to implement a building performance standard needs to know how to best build it, how to create the ordinance so that it could be as fair and effective as possible, and then once their legislation is passed, how to write the regulations and how to implement it on the administrative side. So, the city of Boston being one of the first cities to reach this point, so much of my role and others and my colleagues is to meet with other cities and share our experience and be as transparent as possible. If the goal is to be as fair and effective as possible in implementing this legislation, then we have to turn around and be as transparent as possible, and recognize that this is new. And I have to say, I think a lot of success in this space, the success of these policies, are questions of calibration. So, where are you setting the threshold for the size of the building that is subject to this ordinance? What timeline are you giving these buildings? How much runway are you giving? How much flexibility are you building out within the ordinance? And where are you setting those initial emissions limits? And those are all very much questions that need to be open. We have to be honest, and we have to have that ongoing conversation, and we have to be able to adjust. We can't just hold on to the initial legislation that we passed. We have to be able to take the new information that we're getting, and again, if the goal is to be as fair and effective as possible, we have to take that new information and implement it effectively.
Yeah, those details matter. So yeah, thank you.
Yep. Also, I would like to add that our both cities are part of the National Building Performance Standards Coalition, and we are part of the working group. So where we share our experience, what works, if there are any roadblocks, we discuss how to deal with it, and also for cities or other municipalities, states, they can see what they can implement better, what will work better for them. So these ongoing discussions and meetings are very helpful to all of us. And as Aidan mentioned, they're very honest and very candid, and we're moving forward.
That's excellent. We've only got a little bit of time left, so I want to move on to our last question. I'd like to do kind of a lightning round, to end things off here. So, Katarina, let's start with you. Flash forward to 2035. How has building performance changed in your city?
I would love to see healthier city. In 10 years, I would love to see more smaller buildings to become energy efficient, not only larger one. So we can reach our goal by year 2050, but hopefully sooner. Why not? I think it's good to be ambitious and set the goals high. So the healthier city for all of us.
That's wonderful. Aidan, same question.
Well, I think overall we're going to see far more high performance heat pumps, which are going to really be more dominant in the space or in space heating and water heating. And the building performance standard policies themselves, I think there's going to be far less confusion and resistance to it. And there's going to be a much more automated data collection process, and more clarity around financing and how everyone can navigate this whole space moving forward.
Those sound great to me. Sounds like we've got a great future to look forward to.
I think so.
Well, thanks so much to both of you for joining us. This has been really a great discussion.
Thank you, Stephen. Good to see you, Aidan.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us. You'll be able to find a recording of this episode and any of our past episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube. And check out atlasbuildingshub.com to read our digests and data stories and to join our community. Stay tuned for a new episode of Buildings Hub Live soon. See you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.